It's time to start your morning by taking 5. Here's your host, Matt McMaster.
You're listening to Take 5, a quick 5-minute take on the biggest things happening in Nebraska sports. I'm your host, Matt McMaster, and today we are talking about Nebraska football and their loss to Penn State. The Nittany Lions dominated the Nebraska Cornhuskers, defeating them 37-10. Penn State did everything that Michigan did. They did everything that Minnesota did. They ran the football. They took advantage of Nebraska's bad angles from the secondary. They took advantage of Nebraska's inability to set an edge. They took advantage with Nebraska being weak up front in the interior of the defensive line. They took advantage of Nebraska's inability to really rush the passer consistently. Penn State had a really good game plan. They came out. They're the team, frankly, that looked like they were coming off of a bye week, that they had an extra week of preparation. They looked like they were the team that was still playing to go to a bowl game, or to go to a good bowl game, to go and play in the Citrus Bowl, to be the top CFP, top non-CFP representative of the Big Ten. They look like they had a ton to play for, and frankly, Nebraska, came out flat. And obviously you're disappointed with the 27-point loss. Obviously you're disappointed that they got dominated. Obviously you're disappointed that they came out flat and looked the way that they looked. I'm disappointed because this team looks way too similar to what they looked like in Kansas City. This team looks way too similar from the team that played their very first game of the season. This team has not made the improvements that I thought and hoped they would as the season progressed, right? And there are a couple guys that you could point to and say, hey, they got better. Emmett Johnson, without a doubt, has gotten better. He has made some big improvements. The offensive line, as the season's gone on, has gotten better. I can acknowledge that there have been specific spots and specific players that have, improved. And don't get me wrong, Emmett, went from being, is he good enough to really be a great Big Ten running back, to he's a Doak Walker semifinalist, and really the only reason, or one of the big reasons as to why Nebraska is 7-4 with an opportunity to win 8 games this season. But a lot of what we saw against Penn State, we saw against Cincinnati. The lack of a pass rush, the weakness on the interior of the defensive line, the missing tackles in the secondary. A lot of what we saw against Penn State, we saw against Michigan, we saw against Minnesota. Once again, Penn State, just like Minnesota did, has a long, drive that wears out Nebraska, that proves, hey, we can score on you whenever we want. We can drive the ball on you. We can run the ball on you. We can physically dominate you. It was just this team's culture, and the Matt Rule era, in my opinion, has always been rooted in two things: culture and player development. And I don't question the culture of Nebraska football. They have bounced back week in and week out. They've come back from tough losses to win games. There hasn't been anything that's happened that makes me question whether or not they have camaraderie or anything like that. But I do question the player development. Matt Rule was hired because he was a great player developer at Temple. Matt Rule was hired because he was a great player developer at Baylor, okay? That was what was lacking in the Scott Frost era. It wasn't recruiting. It wasn't talent acquisition. Scott Frost got some good talent in Nebraska. You go and look at the recruiting rankings. Nebraska under Scott Frost, except for 1 year, was consistently in the 20s, top 25 in recruiting. They were getting dudes into the program. It's just they never got any better. They never developed. They never took that step. And when Trev Alberts hired Matt Rule, he hired him well knowing that, hey, it's going to be difficult from a talent perspective to compete with some of these teams in the SEC who in their backyard are just 6'7", 330-pound linemen, right? But, he hired Matt Rule knowing, hey, this is a guy, and he's done it before, that can take maybe a little bit lesser talent and develop him into NFL talent. And Matt Rule has done it to a certain extent here at Nebraska. He did it with Ty Robinson. He's done it with Emmett Johnson. He's done it with Deshaun Singleton. But there are areas of this team where there's just been zero development. The tackles have not developed in the way that you've wanted them to develop. The offensive tackles in particularly have not developed the way that you wanted them to develop. Riley Van Poppel, Cam Lenhart, guys in the interior defensive line have not taken the steps that you hope they would take. The linebackers, John Bullock was a great success story, so that, you got that development. But I thought we would see a bigger jump from Vincent Shavers this year. I think he's played good football. I think he's played well, but I thought you'd get a little bit more. And it's just, when your identity is rooted in that and your identity is player development, and there just seems to be a lack of it and a lack of improvement throughout the season, it's worrying. I mean, I'm very worried that Nebraska football has played 10 games or 11 games this season, and they look way too similar and way too much like the team that played Cincinnati and Kansas City. They're making similar mistakes. It seems like they're not learning from it. And this is what happens also, too. Like earlier in the year, we said, wow, Mike Eckler's bailing them out on special teams, and I wonder this team would look like if they didn't have great special teams impact plays. Well, you haven't gotten them the last couple of weeks, and so this is what it looks like. This is what that product is. So I just think and look, I'm not a football coach or anything like that. I can't tell you, how they can get these players better and how they're going to develop the players. But I don't think that the most damning thing is the score or what occurred on the field. I think the most damning thing is the fact that you knew you had a problem stopping the run in week 1 against Cincinnati. You knew you had a problem rushing the passer and getting sacks and causing havoc plays. You knew you had those issues, and yet they haven't been solved. And it's just incredibly frustrating and disappointing when you're sold to be one thing and then you are another. And Nebraska football was sold to be a player development program, to be, a place that take young guys, maybe that weren't as shiny prospects out of high school, and turn them into dudes. And they've done that. They've done that with Emmett Johnson. They've done that with Ty Robinson, but they haven't done it to the extent that they needed to do it in the 3 years that they've been here to go ahead and beat a team like Penn State. Because once again, Matt Rule plays a team that is more talented than his roster, and yet he can't beat them. And in his 3 years, in the 36 games that Matt Rule has coached at Nebraska, he has won a game outright as an underdog twice. If Nebraska football can only ever beat teams that they are more talented than, they're never going to beat Ohio State. They're never going to beat USC. They're never going to beat Oregon. They're never going to beat Michigan. They're never going to beat any of the top teams in the SEC. If they can only beat teams that they have more talent than, then the program will not take the steps that the fans, the athletic department, and ultimately Coach Rule wants to take. And so I don't know. I can't pinpoint to you what specifically they need to get better at from a player development perspective, but you're returning a lot of these guys from last season to this season in theory. This season to next season. In theory, you're returning a lot of these dudes, and you got to make sure you got to sharpen them up, man, especially that defensive line, because you are not going to have fun in the Big Ten for a long period of time if you can't shore up the interior of that D-line. And that was a problem in a problem in Kansas City against Cincinnati, and now it's a problem still 11 games later. Unacceptable in my opinion. Alrighty, that's been Take 5, and I've been Matt McMaster.